So, we are still trying to dissect what we all saw, what happened at Citi Field. And Max Scherzer, he said it. I didn't, but I actually agree with what he said. There were moments throughout the season when Mets fans thought the culture of this franchise and this ball club had changed. CeeLo, as we sit here, and this team is now out of the postseason, where should Mets fans feel about the culture of this supposedly changed ball club?
Well, I don't think the culture really changed at all from what we knew of the Mets before the season up until this point, other than it didn't end well. But I think when you take a step back, and we're a couple hours removed from the season ending, but I think the way in which it went down, a disappointing September, I think, getting locked in on hey, they won 101 games. That was something that I think, locked in on heading into the postseason. That's sort of like, okay, well, we can fall back on that. The Braves played really well. They caught us. We were still a really good team. We accomplished a lot of great things. But the takeaway now, coming up as short as they did in this series against the Padres, what do you really grab hold of? Okay, it was a great regular season, but, we were supposed to come in and win this series in our own ballpark with our starting pitchers lined up the way we wanted against a team on paper that, we felt we were better than, and they just didn't execute starting pitching-wise. Obviously, the offense, which we touched on, even Buck, some of his managerial decisions I thought were a little head-scratching at times. So there's not a lot to grab hold of as far as the takeaway to look ahead going into the offseason to feel better about where you were.
Yeah, I think in this moment, CeeLo, it's hard for us to think of anything good about the Mets, right? Even though they did have the glossy record and everything, they did disappoint in the playoffs. There's no question about that. And they didn't play up to their capabilities. They blew it at the end when they didn't win the division, and they should have. And that's a lot to process right now and a lot to unpack. I do think that the culture around the team changed, and I think that the guy who just delivered that pretty decent line there about what this series loss was, Max Scherzer, has a great deal to do with that. He's sort of lifted the entire clubhouse with his sort of intensity and his talent and his excellence. Obviously, he came up pretty small in his one postseason start, and that's a bad deal for him and the Mets. But they did make some strides, I think, as an organization, because I don't think that they were at this point at all before this year. But right now, it's hard to think about all that sort of stuff because we're still licking those wounds from the bad end.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that a franchise, second best record in the franchise history, 101 wins, is going to be overshadowed by getting swept by the Braves and eliminated by the Padres. But this is certainly a gut punch for the franchise and its fans. And to make matters worse, Anthony, this sets up an offseason with a ton of uncertainty and turbulence. How much can the fans take when they look at who's who's going to be free agents?
Right. I would like to just, as a public service announcement, you should realize that this is going to be a winter of tumult. The free agent market, there's tons of Mets going out on it, including, obviously, some enormous names. Jacob deGrom, a beloved Met, Brandon Nimmo, Edwin Diaz. The list goes on and on. There's going to be a lot of hot stove action around this team. Some of it will be great, and it'll be fun to follow along, and some of it will be a little bit heartbreaking. Change is coming, CeeLo. It's going to be a big winter for the Mets.
And it's a unique situation. As we were just talking about, the culture change and how to... Usually when you get a culture change and a new regime comes in, it's normally a younger, ascending team, and you have maybe a few veterans that are helping oversee that culture change. And the Mets do have that to an extent, but there are a lot of question marks, and the roster could look remarkably different than it did this season right here at the end. Jacob deGrom most notably, and right now it's really hard to get inside his head and know what, the key factors are going to be for him. But I think that kind of sets the stage for the entire offseason, because if he walks away, obviously Scherzer's here, but, who is that number two guy going to be? Is it someone internally, someone that we saw this year that they're going to re-sign? They're going to have to go out and find that person. And then obviously some question marks as far as the position players go as well. So, it's not like, I hate to go back to the Braves, but that those young guys they've locked up, they have that core in place. It's not to say that the Mets are going to take some giant step back. We'll see how it plays out. But they don't have those boxes checked right now as we head off into their offseason.
And the Mets better have been right about the prospects they held on to at the trade deadline, because that was a big thing. They probably needed more help than they ended up getting in July, at the end of July. And, now is Brett Beatty going to be great? Is Mark Vientos going to be great? Francisco Alvarez? They all have to contribute.
Season's over, but the questions continue for the New York Mets. Anthony McCarron, Chris Lopresti, thank you as always.